They mocked his prayers. They poured soup on his hands and laughed while his Bible burned. But when the alarm screamed and the doors locked, they finally saw who they'd humiliated. A Marine chaplain who didn't need fists to make a prison fall silent. Morning light hummed against the steel and glass of Ravenhill Federal Medical Center. Elias Ward moved a mop across the rehab ward floor, each stroke patient and precise. The machines breathed for the men in beds, the air thick with disinfectant and fatigue. The doors hissed open. Officer Larkin stepped in with a group of new recruits, his smile sharp enough to cut. "Morning, preacher," he called out. "Didn't expect God's janitor to clock in early." Laughter echoed. Elias kept working. Larkin's gaze landed on the small leather notebook resting in the cleaning cart. "What's this? Confessions?" He flipped it open. Pages full of names. "Fallen soldiers," Elias said quietly. "Then they won't mind being baptized." Larkin dropped the book into the mop bucket. Water rippled. A few recruits laughed. Across the room, a monitor began to scream. The old man in bed 12 went pale, body jerking. Elias moved, but Larkin blocked his path. "Hold on, preacher. Maybe let your God handle this one." Elias's jaw tightened. He took a slow breath, 4 in, 4 out, the rhythm that once steadied him under fire. Then he stepped around Larkin, pressed the call button, and began chest compressions. The man coughed, color returning. Larkin's grin faded. "Guess the Lord works through janitors now." He pulled the soggy notebook from the bucket, dropped it at Elias's feet. "On your knees. Clean that mess up. Pray while you're at it." The mop handle trembled in Elias's hands. The ward reeked of alcohol and humiliation. Still he knelt, because there were witnesses, and rage was a luxury the wounded couldn't afford. "Louder," Larkin said. "Let's hear a verse." Elias looked up. "You should check room 12, officer. Infection's spreading." The trainees shifted uneasily. Larkin blinked, unsure if it was a threat or a warning. The doors opened again. Dr. Helen Strauss entered, tablet in hand, her expression practiced into neutrality. She scanned the scene, Larkin towering, Elias kneeling, a puddle reflecting both. "Everything all right here?" "All good, Doc," Larkin said smoothly. "Just a little housekeeping." Elias rose slowly, joints stiff, picked up his soaked notebook and pressed it to his chest. He looked at Strauss, not pleading, not angry, just waiting to see if she'd notice what the room had become. She didn't. He set the mop aside. "Make sure the patient in 12 gets antibiotics," he said quietly. Strauss frowned. "Why 12? "Because infections spread," he answered, then walked past them, leaving wet footprints that gleamed under the fluorescent light. The trainees watched him go, laughter dying in their throats. One muttered, "Man didn't even blink." Larkin sneered, kicking the bucket. "Yeah, next time he will." Down the hall, Elias stopped under the hum of the lights, wringing water from his sleeve. The notebook dripped onto the tiles, forming small, perfect circles. He looked down at the first name inside, one of the fallen, and smiled faintly. "Still fighting clean," he murmured. The corridor swallowed his voice. Behind him, machines steadied into rhythm again. For a moment, it sounded like the building itself was learning how to breathe. Night came soft over Ravenhill, the kind of quiet that carried every sound like confession. The fluorescent lights buzzed in the supply room where Elias sat alone. Sleeves rolled, notebook open beside him. The pages still smelled faintly of bleach. He turned one slowly, smoothing it flat with calloused fingers. Inside, names filled the lines like prayers he'd written for men who never made it home. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass insignia, 2 crossed rifles behind a cross, the mark of a Marine chaplain. The metal was worn, edges dulled by time, but it still caught the light like something that refused to fade. He set it on the table and exhaled. The sound of the vent above him shifted, and for a moment it wasn't air. It was rotor blades. The desert came back without permission, heat, dust, and the smell of metal cooking under the sun. A young soldier lay in the sand, eyes wide and wet, blood rising through his uniform like ink through paper. "If I don't make it," the boy whispered, "tell my mom I fought clean." Elias pressed a hand to the wound, the other gripping a cross that hung against his chest. "You did, son," he said, "and I will too." The boy blinked once and didn't again. The world shook, then stilled. Elias opened his eyes. The supply room came back into focus. The shelves of gauze, the hum of the old fridge. He reached for a form on the desk. 9B72, religious discrimination, policy violation. The words looked small but sharp. He began to fill it out with steady handwriting. Under description, he wrote only, interference with religious materials and staff dignity. Under requested action, he paused, then wrote, review under Federal Chaplain Protection Act. The door opened quietly. Rivera stepped in, holding a flashlight she didn't need. You're still here, she said. Couldn't sleep, he replied, finishing the form. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. You think they'll actually read that? He smiled faintly. Paper remembers what pride forgets. Rivera walked closer, peering over his shoulder. You really were a preacher once, huh? Chaplain, he corrected gently. Preachers talk. Chaplains listen. Her gaze softened. You could file a complaint the usual way. This is the usual way, he said, folding the form neatly. Just slower. He slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and held it out to her. If you drop this in the blue box by the admin wing after midnight, it bypasses the internal review. She took it, eyebrows raised. You've done this before. Some fights need paperwork, not fists, he said. And paperwork doesn't bleed. As they stepped into the hallway, Rivera's shoes squeaked on the waxed tile. The fluorescent light above them flickered like an eye refusing to close. At the far end of the corridor stood Sergeant Himes, a heavy man with a face that looked carved from disapproval. He had a toothpick in his mouth, arms crossed over his chest. You people in your forms, Himes said, voice carrying just enough to sting. You think paper's gonna save your soul? Elias met his stare, calm. No, Sergeant. Souls aren't for saving here. Just keeping clean. Himes snorted. This ain't Sunday school, preacher. It's a cage. Remember that. He walked away, the jingle of his keys trailing behind like a bad song. Rivera exhaled. Why do you never bite back? Elias watched the empty hall, because someone has to stay quiet long enough to hear the truth fall apart. She slipped the envelope into her pocket. Then I'll make sure this one gets heard. He nodded once. The vent rattled overhead, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and something older, like dust that had learned patience. When Rivera left, the corridor fell still again. Elias looked down at his badge, then at the closed door. He whispered, almost to himself, still fighting clean. The light buzzed once, steadying as if it approved. He picked up his notebook, pressed the damp corner flat, and began to write another name. Just a first name, nothing more. For him, that was enough. Lunch at Ravenhill smelled like salt, metal, and something overboiled. Elias carried his tray through the line, eyes steady, hands sure. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual noise, plastic trays clattering, guards laughing too loud at nothing. Larkin stood near the center, sleeves rolled, voice sharp enough to cut through the hum. Inspection time, he said, grinning. Everyone stay seated. We're keeping this place holy. His eyes found Elias, and the grin widened. Preacher, say us a blessing, would you? Elias said nothing. He set his tray down, folded his napkin. Larkin grabbed the tray, flipped it, and sent hot soup spilling across Elias's lap. The smell hit first. Salt, fat, humiliation. Now it's blessed, Larkin said, and a few men laughed before realizing the sound didn't fit the room. At the next table, Mr. Carter, old, frail, proud, pushed himself up, voice cracking but firm. That's enough. Larkin turned, smirk already returning. Sit down, Grandpa. Leave him be, Carter said, leaning on his cane. Larkin's hand moved before his thought caught up. He shoved. Carter stumbled backward, cane clattering, head striking the table corner with a dull thud. The laughter died instantly. The room froze. Elias was on his feet, kneeling beside Carter before anyone moved. Blood trickled through the old man's thin white hair. You're all right? Elias said quietly. His voice was steady, the kind used to calm soldiers when the noise got too loud. Stay with me. Rivera appeared from the far side of the room, sliding on gloves, eyes hard. Move, she said to Larkin, shoving past him. He fell, Larkin said quickly, slipped on the floor. Elias didn't look up. Then you should clean it, he said, pressing a wad of gauze to Carter's scalp. Rivera shot him a glance, half warning, half gratitude. Dr. Strauss arrived a minute later, tablet in hand, and confusion already shaping into caution. What happened? He fell, Larkin repeated louder. Rivera stood, eyes cutting toward the security camera on the wall. Dark. No red light. Dead feed. She noticed the tiny panel cover slightly ajar, Larkin's work. She turned back to Strauss. We need imaging. Possible laceration. Fine, Strauss said. Get him to radiology. As they lifted Carter onto a gurney, his voice rasped. You hit like a boy, he muttered. Larkin's eyes flickered. Elias pressed a hand to Carter's shoulder. Easy, he whispered. Save your strength. They rolled out. The cafeteria stayed silent until the doors shut, then filled with whispers like insects in dry grass. Larkin glanced at the blank camera again. Guess we'll need to replace that, he said. Rivera didn't answer. In the hallway, she handed Elias the memory card she'd swapped earlier, her palm closing tight around his. Pantry cam caught everything, she whispered. He nodded once. Keep it safe. Later in radiology, the hum of machines filled the space. Strauss hovered behind the tech, arms folded, staring at the images. He'll be fine, she said at last. Carter cracked one eye open. Tell your guard, he swings like a coward. Strauss almost smiled. I'll note it in his chart. When the gurney started moving again, she turned to Elias. Until we sort this, you'll work supply, basement level. Elias looked at her, unreadable. Basement's quiet, he said. I'll manage. Rivera caught up with him near the elevator. You know what they're doing, right? He nodded. When they push you down far enough, that's where the roots find light. The elevator doors opened. The smell changed. Dust, cold, forgotten air. He stepped inside, turned once toward her. Keep the copy safe, he said. I already did, she replied. The doors closed. Metal groaned. He rode down alone, the hum of the machinery steady like breathing through a closed throat. Somewhere above, laughter tried to restart and failed. At the basement landing, Elias stepped out, the lights humming weakly overhead. Pipes ran along the ceiling like veins. He looked around, nodded once to himself, and whispered, Sometimes you have to go underground before anyone looks up. His words disappeared into the concrete, but the air seemed to hold them, like the building had started to listen. The basement was colder than the rest of Ravenhill, the kind of cold that carried the taste of iron. Elias moved through the narrow hall lined with pipes that hissed and sweated. Dust hung in the air like breath too tired to leave. A single fluorescent tube flickered, throwing shadows that stretched and folded. Somewhere above him, the world kept running. Meals served, keys jingling, orders barked. But down here, it felt like the building had swallowed its own heart. He worked quietly, stacking boxes marked Surplus Medical 2019, counting what no one cared to count. The hum of the light filled the silence until another sound broke through. Boots on metal stairs. Slow, confident, Larkin. Basement suits you, Larkin said as he stepped into the doorway, grin flashing in the weak light. Didn't think I'd find you hiding in the dark, preacher. Elias didn't look up. Not hiding, just working. Larkin walked closer, boots scraping the floor. You made quite the mess upstairs. That old man's in medical, you know. Lot of paperwork for one accident. He emphasized the word like it was a joke, only he found funny. Elias kept counting. Some accidents come with names. Larkin's smile thinned. You think you're clever? You think writing up complaints makes you safe? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded form. This is your statement. Says you provoked the incident. Sign it. Elias turned finally, eyes calm. You forged that. Larkin stepped closer until their shadows touched. You'll sign it anyway. You people love paperwork, right? Consider it your gospel. I don't lie, Elias said. Larkin laughed quietly, a sound with no humor in it. You will, preacher. Everyone does when the lights go out. He pressed the pen into Elias's hand. Go on. Be smart for once. Elias looked at the paper, then at the man in front of him. Young, angry, convinced he'd never lose. You should be careful what you bury, he said. Sometimes the ground remembers. What the hell's that supposed to mean? Before Elias could answer, the basement lights flickered again. A low alarm began to sound, a metallic shriek rolling through the pipes. The red emergency strobes burst to life, painting the walls in pulses of crimson. Larkin froze. What did you do? Elias stood still. That's not a fire alarm. What? That's an audit. The intercom crackled overhead. Attention, all units. Federal compliance inspection in progress. Lockdown protocol engaged. Larkin's face went pale. No, 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 you didn't. The basement door swung open. Rivera appeared first, her face tight with resolve, followed by two men in plain suits carrying folders. Their badges caught the red light. Federal SEAL, Department of Corrections Oversight Division. Officer Larkin, the taller one said. We're here about report 9B72. Larkin's voice cracked. He's lying. He's just... The shorter agent opened his folder. Elias Ward, former captain, U.S. Marine Corps chaplain, 2nd Division, Commendations 3. He looked up, calm. You filed against a decorated officer of faith protection status. You might want to think before finishing that sentence. Larkin's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Rivera held up a small memory card in a plastic sleeve. Footage from pantry cam, the cafeteria, the shove, the camera tampering. She looked at Elias, her voice steady. Everything's there. The taller agent, Major Trent, nodded once. Captain Ward, he said, turning toward Elias, we received your report. You'll accompany us upstairs for official review. Then he shifted his gaze to Larkin. You'll stay where you are. Larkin backed away a step, words catching in his throat. He tricked me. Elias watched him, expression unreadable. No, he said quietly, you tricked yourself. For a moment, the only sound was the wail of the fading alarm. Rivera stood near the door, breathing hard. Trent extended a hand, the gesture respectful. Elias hesitated, then took it. Still fighting clean, Captain? Trent said. Elias allowed a small smile. Only way I know how. When they turned to leave, Larkin's voice followed them, thin and breaking. You can't do this. Trent didn't look back. We already did. They climbed the stairs, the red light dimming behind them. Rivera glanced once over her shoulder at the basement, now quiet again, the sound of boots fading. She caught sight of Larkin standing alone under the flickering tube, a man suddenly aware that the world had stopped clapping. Elias reached the landing and paused, one hand on the rail, the alarm cut off completely, leaving the deep silence of a place that had just told the truth out loud. Sometimes, he said softly, you don't need to raise your voice to make the walls listen. The air felt lighter after that. Somewhere in the distance, a door unlocked with a click that sounded almost like mercy. Morning broke over Ravenhill slow and pale, as if the sun itself wasn't sure it wanted to come in. The storm from the night before had left the windows streaked with gray, and the building felt hungover with silence. Elias stood at the nurse's station, hands folded, the same calm that had carried him through worse mornings, keeping his breath steady. The noise of radios, alarms, boots, all of it had gone softer, quieter, like the walls were thinking. Rivera arrived with 2 coffees and a folder tucked under her arm. She looked tired but alive. They finished the reports, she said. Larkin suspended. Himes too, pending review. Elias nodded. Paper takes longer than bullets, but it hits deeper. She smiled faintly. You and those sayings, they're going to print them on the walls one day. Then they'll finally have something worth reading, he said. Dr. Strauss appeared from the corridor, clutching a file, her face carrying that nervous calm people wear when they're learning humility. Mr. Ward, she said, pausing like the title tasted strange in her mouth. May I speak with you? He followed her into her office. The blinds were half closed, light falling in clean, straight lines across her desk. She laid a folder in front of him. This came down from Central Administration, she said. Policy revisions, effective immediately. Elias flipped through the pages. The words were bureaucratic, cold, but he recognized the weight beneath them. Faith-based items are protected personal property under federal medical policy. The words glowed faintly in the morning light. You wrote this, he said. I helped, Strauss replied. You started it. He looked at her. It'll matter if they follow it. They will, she said, softer now, because people like you keep reminding the rest of us why we're supposed to. She hesitated. I owe you an apology. He shook his head. You owe it to yourself. You saw what was happening. You just looked away. Her eyes dropped. Not anymore. He closed the folder gently. Then we're even. Outside, the halls had changed in small, invisible ways. Officers spoke quieter. Doors closed slower. A young guard held the elevator for a nurse instead of stepping in first. The kind of details only someone like Elias would notice, and he noticed everything. By noon, a new bulletin appeared on every wall. Mandatory training, de-escalation and ethical conduct. Instructor E. Ward. Rivera found him reading it. "You're famous," she said. He chuckled. "Infamous, maybe." "They could have ignored it," she said. "They didn't." He looked at the paper again. Change always starts like this. Quiet, a line on a wall nobody thinks will stick. Later that day, Strauss found him in the rehab wing. She carried something wrapped in cloth. "I believe this belongs to you," she said, handing it over. Inside was his old notebook, restored, pressed flat, the leather oiled. "We cleaned it up. I couldn't throw it away." He opened it. The pages rippled but held firm. On the first clean sheet, he wrote in neat block letters, "Justice doesn't shout, it breathes." When he looked up, Strauss was watching him. "That's not policy language," she said. "No," he answered. "It's prayer language." That evening, the cafeteria was half full. The usual noise had been replaced by a low murmur, men speaking to one another instead of at one another. Elias sat at a corner table, sipping weak coffee. Across the room, Marcus, the inmate who used to mock his prayers, lifted a hand in quiet acknowledgement. A small thing, but it landed heavy. Rivera joined him, setting down her tray. "Heard Larkin's appealing," she said. "He can," Elias said, "but truth travels faster than his kind of story." "You think he'll ever change?" Elias stirred his coffee. "Maybe. Shame's a slow teacher, but sometimes it graduates." She laughed softly. "You should put that in your book." "I just did." He tapped the notebook in his pocket. When shift change came, Rivera gathered her papers. "You heading out?" "In a minute," he said. "I want to see how the night sounds." After she left, he walked the corridor one last time. The lights hummed soft, the kind of hum that belonged to a building trying to breathe right again. The new memo hung straight on the bulletin board, its corners uncurled. He stopped and read it once more, then turned toward the door. In the glass reflection, his own face looked different. Older, yes, but settled. Behind him, a guard was holding a door open for a patient in a wheelchair. Small mercy, almost invisible, but real. He nodded to himself and whispered, "That's how it starts." The hallway swallowed his words, but this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The night shift at Ravenhill carried a quiet all its own. The rain outside tapped softly against the windows, and the machines in the recovery ward hummed like a tired choir. Elias sat by the window, the glow of a desk lamp turning the pages of his notebook gold. The building had finally learned to rest. Rivera walked in, her hair tied back, holding 2 cups of coffee that steamed in the cold air. "You still don't sleep," she said, setting one beside him. "Not much to dream about," he replied. "Maybe that's changing." She leaned against the counter. "You know they're renaming the rehab ward after you, right? Strauss sent the paperwork this morning." He smiled faintly. "Names fade, habits don't. Better to teach them how to see." "She said you'd say that." Rivera sipped her coffee. "Place feels different now, quieter, like it's thinking." "That's how healing sounds," Elias said. He closed the notebook gently and looked at the rain streaking the glass. Silence doesn't always mean peace, but peace usually starts there. Down the hallway, the new guards made their rounds with softer steps. One stopped to help a patient adjust his blanket. Another picked up a dropped spoon instead of shouting for an inmate to do it. Small things, invisible from a distance, but Elias noticed. He always noticed. Rivera followed his gaze. "Do you ever regret it? Staying here after everything?" He thought for a moment. "I've walked away from enough battles. Some places deserve a second chance to get it right." She nodded slowly, the rain light catching the edge of her smile. "Guess that makes 2 of us." The intercom clicked. "Ward C needs assistance," a voice said. Rivera straightened. "Duty calls." "Go," Elias told her. "They listen to you now." When she was gone, he stayed by the window, watching the faint reflection of himself, the lines deeper, the eyes steadier. He took out his notebook, flipped to the last page. Under the words, "Justice doesn't shout, it breathes," he wrote a final line. Faith lives in what you fix quietly. He let the pen rest there. The rain slowed, the drops smaller, lighter, until it was only mist. He heard a soft knock behind him. Strauss stepped into the room, holding a file. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not letting this place stay what it was." She set the file down. "The board approved new training for every officer, national level. Your report started it." He gave a small nod. "Paper's louder than people think." Strauss hesitated, then added, "You ever miss preaching?" "I never stopped," he said. "Just changed congregations." She smiled, eyes damp, and left him to the quiet. The hallway outside was washed in a warm light now, no harsh whites, no shadows where cruelty used to live. A janitor, young, uncertain, was mopping the same floor where Elias once knelt. When he saw Elias, he stepped aside and nodded respectfully. Elias nodded back. "Keep it clean," he said gently. "I will, sir." When the janitor moved on, Elias returned to his chair. The clock on the wall ticked evenly, unhurried. The rain had stopped completely. He closed his eyes and listened to the hum of the vents, the faint laughter from somewhere down the hall, the sound of a building learning how to breathe. He whispered to the quiet, "They mocked my prayers once. Now the prayer is the room itself." The light above him flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the clouds parted just enough for the moon to find the window. Elias looked up, and for a moment, the reflection of that pale light on the glass looked almost like an answer.